Hello, I'm Max Rudin, President and Publisher of Library of America, and welcome to LOA Live. Library of America is a nonprofit organization dedicated to publishing authoritative new volumes of great American writers and to keeping the multivocal democratic spirit of our literary tradition a vital part of the culture. Information about the books and how to support our work by becoming a member or donor is at LOA.org. Special welcome to the Library of America Fellows and members in the audience tonight, and a special thanks to our promotional partner for this program, the Association of Literary Scholars, Critics, and Writers. Tonight's program explores the powerful, revelatory, and unsettling imagination of novelist Don DeLillo, who turns 88 this year. 2 volumes in Library of America, volumes number 363 and 374 in the series, present the extraordinary run of 5 novels from the 1980s and 90s that includes the masterpieces White Noise, Libra, and Underworld. The LOA DeLillo edition is edited by Mark Osteen, who joins us tonight. When Don DeLillo won the Penn Saul Bellow Award for Achievement in American Fiction, Philip Roth praised his combination of terror and comedy and sheer song. Volume 2 in the DeLillo edition, just out this past fall, is published with a contributory gift from Philip Roth through a bequest made to support publication of works by 20th century writers in the Library of America series. Thanks to his generosity, the volume will stand as a lasting testimony to DeLillo's genius. A link to the book will be dropped in the chat. Information on supporting or permanently endowing volumes in the Library of America series can be found at loa.org/support. Reading about an iconic American moment from his Bronx childhood, the shot heard round the world, Bobby Thompson's come from behind, pennant-clinching home run at the Polo Grounds, DeLillo noticed that the front page of the October 4th, 1951 New York Times carried the account of the game alongside a story about an atomic bomb test explosion in the Soviet Union. 2 poles of an emerging 20th century reality. Somebody seemed to be wanting to tell me something here, DeLillo said. That was the germ of Underworld. Elsewhere, DeLillo said, I've tried to bring a sense of our strange and dangerous time into my work. A remark that captures the way the novels seem like antennae receiving or sending transmissions from the oblique, hidden currents and flows of our time. Add to that his humor, an anthropologist's eye for the bizarrely funny details of everyday life and speech, and the rapturous miracle of his sentences. Is Don DeLillo the essential contemporary novelist, his voice the inner monologue of our time? And isn't it time the Swedish Academy took notice? To explore these and other questions, we have 2 distinguished guests. After almost 50 years in publishing, renowned editor Gerald Howard recently retired as executive editor and vice president of Doubleday Books. Recipient of the 2009 Maxwell Perkins Award, his authors included Paul Auster, David Foster Wallace, and Don DeLillo, with whom he worked closely on Libra. He joins us from his home in Tuxedo, New York. Mark Osteen, editor of the LOA DeLillo edition, is professor of English at Loyola University, Maryland, and author of American Magic and Dread, Don DeLillo's Dialogue with Culture. He's also an award-winning essayist and a musician, co-founder of the Cold Spring Jazz Quartet, in which he plays saxophone and sings. He joins us from his home office in Baltimore, Maryland. We invite your questions and comments. The Q&A button is on your menu bar. Please let us know where you're viewing from. And now, please welcome Mark Osteen and Gerry Howard.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Nice to not see you all.
So,
Do you want to get us started with a thought? I guess we should address the question of the Nobel, why he deserves it, or unless you want to start somewhere else.
Well, the first thing I want to say is, damn right he deserves a Nobel. I don't even think that's up for debate. The first thing I want to say is to thank the Library of America for asking me to do this. It's an honor and a gas. And I want to thank them for doing the books. And I want to thank you, Mark, for just those wonderful revelatory endnotes and annotations. It's a huge amount of work, and I just love dipping into it.
Thank you.
The thing, Mark and I should say to our audience out there, we've had a couple of really fun preliminary conversations that I've enjoyed enormously. And as I was in the gym today watching the television, it occurred to me that what we're doing here is we're doing like Sports Center for DeLillo super fans, you know, but I hope a higher level of discourse than that. But we're on the same page, both of us, about the greatness of Don DeLillo, and I think we want to put some meat on the bones. We want to show where the greatness resides. It's also pretty clear that a case for the greatness of Don DeLillo has to be made on the basis of the books in the library, two Library of America volumes, which is just one of the most astonishing runs of achievement in American literary history. But maybe we can start on the matter of DeLillo's style, and I'll throw it over to you, Mark, and let's talk about that glorious thing, Don DeLillo style.
Absolutely. Well, his sentences sing, and it's an inimitable style. There's a certain rhythm to the sentences, and he's talked about this quite a bit in interviews, that he likes to see the words form on the page from his manual typewriter, and it gets him in the frame of mind that words have a kind of physical presence and volume and weight to them, and they're not lightweight things you throw around. And I think this gives the sentences themselves a kind of heft that many other writers don't have. He easily swings from the very dark and not quite ponderous, but serious, to a witty element in his sentences too, and that it lightens up the darkness. And of course, we have to mention the dialogue as well. Some people accuse DeLillo of writing little essays for his characters, but to me it sounds very naturalistic. Depends on where you want to dip in. If you dip into a novel like Players, which is full of conversations, it sounds like people talking. That is, lagging. There's two or three back and forth, and then someone will come in with something that was said 2 or 3 sentences ago, catching up. Or people speak in half phrases. They don't speak in full sentences, and they seem to know what each other could be thinking at the time. And I'm sure many of us can cite instances from White Noise, just incredible dialogue back and forth that's humorous, and it also seems real, if slightly elevated. And you and I could probably list several of those. For example, the dialogue between Heinrich and Jack about whether it's raining, that goes on for 2 pages, and Heinrich is, too smart for his own good. Prove it's raining. And what makes it funny is that Jack cannot do that. He finds himself flummoxed by his son's sort of prodigious intellect. Or the conversation with the medical technician near the end, when it rings true to many of us who've been completely befuddled by technology, and we want to be recognized, and yet we feel like we're not in on the joke somehow. So he says, the text says, here's how we usually start. I ask questions based on the printout, and then you answer to the best of your ability. Good. We usually start by asking, how do you feel? Based on the printout, just how do you feel? In my own mind, in real terms, I feel relatively sound, pending confirmation. We usually go on to tired. Have you recently been feeling tired? What do people usually say? Mild fatigue is a popular answer. I could say exactly that and be convinced in my own mind it's a fair and accurate description.
You know, I filled out a questionnaire for my yearly physical that's exactly like that.
Me too.
They wanted everything. Well,
What does he want from me? He keeps asking. You know, I want to. I want to please you because you have the power. I don't.
I mean, the thing about it, the first, your points about, I mean, it's ridiculous. It sounds ridiculous to say that a great writer has a special relationship to language, but I think Don takes that to a whole other level. His ear for the registers of American speech is just unbelievable, for jargon. And if you if you look through the span of his career, he can do science, and as in Ratner's Star. I mean, an ear for mimicry. That he can do finance, as in Cosmopolis. He can do sports chatter, as in excuse me, End Zone. And this might actually be a case where you and I could climb onto a particular hobby horse that we both have, which is the richness of Americana, his first novel, which is just, it's a very 60s novel. It's a picaresque. It's not, I'm not making a case for its greatness, but I'm making a case, as you would, for its entertainment value. And it takes place in a television network in the late 60s and early about, and I am sure that every guy or woman in the writer's room of Mad Men had a copy of that book, because the protagonist, David Bell, and Don Draper, like hipster corporate creatures. And I mean, well, I'll just, my contribution to this was I made a list of a lot of first sentences from Don's novels, and I'll read 2 or 3 of them from the names. For a long time, I stayed away from the Acropolis. It daunted me, that somber rock. Or here's from White Noise, an absolute classic. It's the beginning of the semester, which you're much aware of it at the college on the hill, right? Yes. The station wagons arrived at noon along a shining line that coursed through the West Campus. In single file, they eased around the I-beam sculpture and moved toward the dormitories. Or one more, Libra. This was the year he rode the subway to the ends of the city. 200 miles of track. Boom, you're off. I mean, I think the last thing to say about style, for Don, style and content are not distinct. He claims, and I have no reason not to believe him, that he doesn't outline his novels, that one sentence leads to the other sentence. And so language, the sound of the words that he's using, leads him into the content in a way that is really remarkable. And I guess maybe the other thing I would say is that he's an aphorist. He's contributed a lot of phrases and propositions to American literature that have radiated out into the culture. Airborne Toxic Event probably being the most.
Well, and you know, his early work is very aphoristic, even more than the later work, I think. He actually pared that down a bit. One of the things I love about DeLillo's writing is the way he frames certain set pieces, and he'll just go on and it'll capture a certain kind of, maybe a almost antic style. So an example is in Point Omega, when he's describing the movie that Finley made about Jerry Lewis. I don't know if you remember that scene, Gerald. He says, He writes, the film was all Jerry, pure performance, Jerry talking, singing, weeping, Jerry with his ruffled shirt open at the collar, bow tie undone, a raccoon flung over his shoulders, Jerry inviting the nation's love and wonder at 4 a.m. in close-up, a crew-cut sweating man in semi-delirium, a disease artist, begging us to send money to cure his afflicted children. I had him babbling in unsequential edits, one year shading into another, or Jerry soundless, clowning. He is knock-kneed and buck-toothed, bouncing on a trampoline in slow motion, the old flawed footage, the disturbed signals, random noise on the soundtrack, streaky patterns on the screen. He inserts drumsticks in his nostrils. He sticks the hand mic in his mouth.
Yeah.
That sentence when he starts over. This one, I had him babbling in unsequential edits, one year shading into another, or Jerry soundless clowning. He is knock-kneed and buck-toothed. The starting over of the sentence, mid-sentence, that's a DeLillo style signature right there. And it has to do with the rhythm. It seems wrong, but it's beautiful when he does that.
Which I think gets to another one of his unique strengths, I think that we both agree that Don is extending the modernist project of the novel. He's absolutely marinated in Joyce and Faulkner, and it shows in a lot of ways. So he's he's maybe the last and one of the greatest of the high modernists, and yet his grasp of American popular culture is perfectly wonderful. To describe a Jerry Lewis movie with such virtuosity, and that reminds me of probably one of my favorite parts of his oeuvre. Here, use a French word, is in the beginning of Underworld, with all the byplay among Jackie Gleason and Frank Sinatra and Toots Shor, who were all at that game, and J. Edgar Hoover. That just, goddamn, if they didn't really speak like that, but they sure should have.
They should have. That's right.
So Don is reality. Don is high culture, but he's not a Mandarin about it.
Well, you're shading into something important here, Jerry, which is what you call the scope of the fiction.
Yes.
He takes on these really important concerns that all of us have been thinking about over the last 50 years. So the power of images, television, cinema, surveillance, technology, nuclear weapons, capitalism and advertising, which you mentioned, Americana. I mean, David Bell's father is an advertising man, and he brings up that term, the universal third person, which got me really thinking a lot. That's a brilliant idea. Consumerism, the shrinking role of the artist, but also how terrorists seem to have taken over that, and then the reach of clandestine organizations everywhere, and of course, crowds. You have the wonderful crowd at the beginning of Underworld versus those very menacing crowds that we see all the way through Mao 2, different kinds of crowds and how we find our place there.
The future belongs to crowds, as he says. Yes.
Yeah, they're big ideas here. And has anybody handled more of these major themes that affect us than DeLillo? I don't think so. And he handles them in a way that is not partisan, but captures, I think, how we feel and the weight of these concerns on us. And then beyond that, Jerry, I think you agree with me here too, there's a kind of religious element here. Maybe spiritual is another way of saying it, because we see these characters seeking transcendence so often. They're not religious in the sense of a doctrine or theology, but they want to find these moments, like DeLillo in an interview called it the radiance in dailiness, something that shines out, that elevates. And to me, that uplifts him from merely, darkness, but there's these moments that just shine. That, for example, that piece at the end of Underworld, or those post.
That's one of the most. There's your epiphany.
Right.
There's your Joycean epiphany, writ large. I mean, literally on a billboard, of course.
Yeah.
Well, this is another one of my particular hobby horses about Don. His nature as a religious as a Catholic sensibility. He's not a Catholic novelist, but his sensibility is Catholic, and he sees more widely and more deeply than I think almost any other, well, living contemporary novelist. And there were when I was rereading these books, which, by the way, I had not reread Libra since I put it into production in 1985 or 6. Boy, is it good. But there are two sentences that I thought were key. One is, there is a world within the world. That's a thought that Lee Oswald has. And I think this sentence is in Libra. History is the sum total of the things they aren't telling us, which is both funny and profound. And, you know, at one of the tags that that followed Don around throughout his career, somebody called him the chief shaman of the paranoid school of American fiction. Now, there's something to that, in the sense that conspiracies and hidden plots and hidden agendas are very much the stuff of his fiction. But he looks at the, as you said, he looks at the ordinary stuff of life in a way that he sees into it, and stuff emanates out to him.
The world within the world emerges.
Yeah,
when he
there's something in there, and if you just look at it carefully, and he's a master of the image. And in fact, I mean, you would say that he understands that the image has overtaken the word as the master influence of our culture now, and he understands that. He doesn't complain about it, but he shows us this. And well, I just want to say, you're the author of a book, a very fine book called American Magic and Dread, which is one of a phrase from, is it from White Noise or from one of his comments about White Noise?
One of Murray Siskine's comments.
Oh, one of everybody's favorite character. And there's something going on that beyond the data that we are presented.
Well, yeah, with that title, I was trying to get at that sense of transcendence, that seeking the magic that I guess compensates somewhat for the dread, but it also comes out from that. I want to go back to a couple things about the Catholic influence. I see a lot of his characters they undergo rituals. They want rituals that gives them meaning. So, for example, a guy like Glenn Selby, one of the protagonists of Running Dog, Oswald has his rituals that he adheres to. So many of them, they try to build up a certain kind of armor, I guess it is, or meaning through ritualization. And there's also a sense that there's some presence that we can't really name that isn't really watching us and doesn't really care, but it seems to provide us with something. Like at the end of Zero K, remember the sun is shining in twilight through the buildings, it's Manhattanhenge. And that's an incredible moment. There's a young boy with a disability who's looking at that. And he says, the full solar disk bleeding into the streets, lighting up the towers to either side of us. And I told myself that the boy was not seeing the sky collapse upon us, but was finding the purest astonishment in the intimate touch of earth and sun. I went back to my seat and faced forward. I didn't need heaven's light. I had the boy's cries of wonder. What a great ending.
So if you're in the course of doing my homework, I went back to, you can read Don's earliest stories, which were in Epic magazine. And his very first story is called The River Jordan, 1961, I think. And it concerns like a somewhat lunatic storefront church in Hell's Kitchen, which is called, the preacher calls it the psychic church of the crucified Christ. Now this is, I'm not making a case for this story. It's never been collected, and I'm sure that's okay, but damn, I am sure that he was reading Flannery O'Connor very carefully at this time. And if we go forward decades, it after all, in late DeLillo, the title of one of his third to last book was Point Omega. Point Omega is taken directly from Teilhard, the theologian Teilhard de Chardin. And it is absolutely to the point that Don was educated by the Jesuits at Fordham. And there are, by the way, a number of really, really excellent Jesuit jokes all throughout his work. But again, he doesn't carry religion. It's not on his sleeve. But it's a way of seeing the world, that there's something transcendent.
Yeah. There's a meaning behind what seems to lack meaning. We can't really grasp it, but there seems to be some kind of meaning there. I'm going to go back to something you said about Libra for a second too, Jerry. It's got a conspiracy theory in it. This is how Kennedy was assassinated, but at the same time, it critiques conspiracy theories. So it does both at the same time, and it also manages to make Lee Oswald a human. You know, I don't know if all would agree with me, but you almost feel like sympathetic toward the young man who's just so confused and really wants something to give him purpose. And that is a triumph of artistry there. Someone who'd been so vilified for, 60 years up to that.
Well, what struck me was how tightly plotted.
Oh, very much so.
It is a really, really tight, thrilling book, but also it contains within itself its own critique, because the forward motion of the plot of these rogue CIA agents is not interrupted, but stopped from time to time. And there's the figure of Nicholas Branch, who has been tasked to write a history of the assassination, and who's lost himself in the documentation of all this. And by the way, it contains one of the best lines Don ever wrote. He says that the Warren Commission report is the megaton novel that James Joyce would have written if he'd gone to the Iowa Writers Workshop, which, there are just some things you just said, oh, I remember reading that and I think, Don, you're just a higher life form. That's the only way. But it brings up one question of is Don DeLillo postmodern? Are his novels postmodern? And I've been thinking about this, and I don't believe his novels are postmodern because there are no trapdoors. They're not self-reflexive. They're not metafictional. What you're given is what you're reading is what you're getting. But what I think is that his characters are postmodern.
Yeah, that's good.
I think they exist in a kind of like a third person consciousn's about themselves.
Universal third person. One of his ideas is that the presence of cameras everywhere has separated us from ourselves, so we're always watching ourselves and performing even when we're alone. And to me, that's a postmodern insight about the characters. But I agree with you, Jerry. I don't think his sensibility is specifically postmodern. I think it's more modernist than that. But the characters live in a postmodern world, so he has to present that, and he
Yeah,
presents.
they ironize themselves to
Yeah.
an incredible degree. That's most conspicuous in the figure of Jack Gladney, who is who's really onto himself in a almost paralyzing
Yeah.
way.
He's
He
aware
knows
that he's performing, and it makes him too self-conscious to act.
he's he knows he's got a great con going, and he's in on the con, but he's got to keep this academic Hitler studies thing going because it's working. And and so I think that's my contribution to DeLillo studies, that he's not a postmodernist, but his characters
I think that's good.
postmodern.
Well, and you mentioned too about the style. Let's go back for a second to the voice. The voice of Jack Gladney is so amazing in that novel because it has so many elements to it, that he's humorous and detached and haunted and guilty and all of those things at once. And he also mentioned in an interview, and I think this is very true, he got Libra when he captured the voice of Marguerite Oswald. When he got her voice, that launched the book, and that is another triumph. That it sounds so perfect. The kind of whining and the self-justification and it seems real, and it also makes you want to sort of pity her at the same time. And that's a very hard little rail to have to climb on.
I would like to make a case for Jack Ruby as a comic triumph too. I mean, when I read that in manuscript, I just fell over. Well, maybe we could get to another index of literary greatness, which is the matter of influence.
I was just going to say that. That should be next.
Well, take it, Doctor.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of novelists who have testified to his influence and admire him, and we could make a list here. You already mentioned David Foster Wallace. How about Jonathan Franzen, Michael Chabon, Richard Powers, Dana Spiotta, and
Dana Spiotta especially.
Yeah,
I think I would call her the greatest inheritor of the DeLillo style or approach. And I know that the two of them are, but I admire her enormously.
Jennifer Egan is another one. I think anybody who's going to write on rock or pop music owes a debt to Great Jones Street, one of the novels he wrote early that's kind of neglected. But you know, the Visit to the Goon Squad, excuse me, and the most recent one, The Candy House, they show a similar attitude towards rock music. I think there's definitely a debt there. And you know, he's written to them, he's mentored some of them, so you know that influence is not just in the books; it's personal as well, I think.
Yeah, well, I would like to think a little bit about how are these books DeLillo-esque? How are these writers DeLillo-esque? Well, I mean,
which novel you pick, I guess, for the author.
Well, I think Don. And to a certain extent, we should, you know, these writers, they also admire Thomas Pynchon. Well, and maybe we can get to the Pynchon-DeLillo. Well, Pynchon and DeLillo know each other, and I believe they have had lunch from time to time. And boy, would I like to be at that lunch. But I think that Don's books have made it possible for these writers, all of whom are very brainy and very to deal with, to put ideas in their work that and not be afraid to do so. That his example has opened up a kind of intellectual field, a depth of field in the American novel that I don't think would have been there if he had not shown the way.
Yeah, and well, you know, many of them say, "I didn't know you could do that." They read that and go, "I didn't know you could do that," and then it frees them up to, "Oh, well, I think I can try that too. Or I'm going to do something similar to that." So who's written a novel that's actually more literary about sports than
End Zone.
End Zone or the beginning of Underworld?
Yes.
You know,
I just want to say, I'm part of the relatively small population who read that beginning of Pafko at the Wall with dismay, because I grew up in Brooklyn, and that was probably the worst. It was the second worst day in Brooklyn history, because the worst day was when the Dodgers left. There's one book I would want to mention. I mean, I think, well, we should also talk about Don's presence in literary studies, because you know, Viking Penguin, there's the one reprint, so their extra edition they have is they have a Viking critical edition of White Noise with a lot of criticism and supporting materials around it. And I think White Noise, probably the most influential American novel of the past 30, 40 years in terms of style and general approach. There's a very good book by a youngish writer named Benjamin Kunkel called Indecision, which was published in I would say about 15 years ago. He's one of the founders of N+1. And Random House presented this as a sort of young men in the city sort of follow-up to Jay McInerney's novel. And I actually think it was the wrong approach. I think Indecision was absolutely a gloss and a tribute to White Noise in its own way. But there's no question that some of the best young or youngish, or now they're probably not so young, American writers have followed Don's example.
True. Well, in the Academy, if I could just say, Jerry, when I first started writing about DeLillo's works, there was almost no critical literature about him, none. This is about 1990. There was Tom LeClaire's book and one or two essay collections, and that was
In the Loop, which is I recommend to everybody. In the Loop.
That was about it. But I can testify, after White Noise, there was an explosion of critical writing on DeLillo, and that has continued. Underworld's written about a lot, as is Libra. There are many, many, many DeLillo scholars now, and many people are writing on that. So it was also the breakthrough into the recognition of by the Academy, and that means we teach those books in classes, which then gets students to go, oh, that's an important writer. So, you know, it's important to have the Academy because they keep, you know, they sell books and people read them, and then it creates a kind of canon that this now is okay to write about. We know that this is an important writer. So that has just exploded in the last.
Yeah. I was roaming around on the internet seeing this, and I was sort of impressed and a little alarmed to see that there's an article that applies the insights of Jacques Lacan to Americana, which
that makes a certain kind
on one level it's interesting, on the other level it could send people away screaming. So I think the last thing we would want to talk about in terms of example, and this is something that as a book, as somebody who made his living in publishing, I have a feeling for the dignity with which Don DeLillo has conducted his career. And I know I know that is also an influence on the writers who have come after him. I mean, he was once taken as a recluse, which is so completely wrong. He's not, in no way, he is not Thomas Pynchon in that sense, but he keeps his distance from the literary industrial complex. His editors have all, without man or woman, loved working with him because he he's cooperative. He's a wonderful guy in person. I would say, you know, Bob Gottlieb worked with him, Elizabeth Sifton at Viking. I worked with him, Paul Slovak, and Nan Graham at Scribner's has been a peerless editor for Don for 20 years now. But he does what's necessary, but he's not really a blurber. He doesn't teach. He keeps, as I say, he keeps himself at just the perfect distance for himself and for his needs from the whole machinery of literary production.
Yeah, I agree with that. We should
one other thing I do want to say that's really important is that when the Salman Rushdie fatwa came down, which was a total and a complete freak out for everybody in the literary world, people were terrified as to what this meant. And about a month after, Norman Mailer, Gay Talese, and Ed Doctorow organized a reading in support of Salman Rushdie downtown New York at the Puck building, an auditorium at Puck building, and Don was there. And Don spoke out in support of Rushdie. And I have to say that took real courage. And I was at that reading, and what you could feel was a kind of parting of the clouds, a kind of sense that finally somebody is speaking out and fighting back. And Don was part of that.
That's great. And right after that, then he published Mao Too. And it's important for everybody to realize that he is not Bill Gray. Bill Gray is not autobiographical. Bill Gray does exactly the opposite of what you just described, Jerry. He gets taken in by the terrorists and used by them instead of making a stand. He gets manipulated and ends up dying. So that's an interesting, DeLillo is at a distance from Bill, even though he inhabits his voice. It's another way that he shows his ability to distance himself from the literary machine, but yet, you know, recognizes its power and so forth. And that I don't think was seen. It sort of was read as, oh yeah, DeLillo's writing about himself. No. I don't think that's true. I think it's completely the opposite, as you say. He didn't do that, and he critiques Gray. Gray makes all the wrong decisions, in short.
Right. Well, I mean, in more than one interview, including one I did with him after Underworld was published, I mean, I asked him the question, you know, in a way, you've presented these sort of figures of comic futility who are writers, like Bill Gray and like the writer who lives below Bucky Wunderlich in Great Jones Street. And I said, but you don't really feel that way, do you? I mean, what you don't see writing as a futile or comic pursuit, do you? He said, oh, well, absolutely not. And what he said was that the figure of the writer has to be and should be on the margins, because that's the place where you can see what's going on by not being in the middle of it. And you also have the freedom to say exactly about what you think is going on. So he's put himself, even though I think he's as a writer, he's absolutely at the center of American literature. As a person, as a creator, he's positioned himself exactly on the edge where he wants to be. So he has the freedom to say and to write what he wants to write. I am here to tell you that that is the hardest possible thing to accomplish. And very, very, very few writers have been as wise about positioning themselves in that way as Don. And my respect for him in all aspects is bottomless, but as a publishing professional, I especially appreciate that.
Yeah, so he does what he says. He's an outsider who's yet got his finger on the pulse of the inside. Great place to be. Looks like we're being hi Max.
Well,
Hello, Max.
hi, no. I hate to interrupt you, but I thought it might be a good time to
Yeah,
go to
let's
some
answer
audience,
questions.
some of the questions. Yeah. So I guess the first one is for Jerry, mainly.
Yeah.
So Advait Ubayakar from Atlanta, Georgia, asks if you could talk about your process as an editor with Don, and specifically how finished was the draft of Libra when you first received it? And I should say that P. Benjamin Duke also wrote with a similar question. He said, could you talk about the experience of editing DeLillo and what you learned about his creative process and craftsmanship?
Well, of course, I entered publishing with dreams of being Max Perkins. And let me tell you that Don does not need a Max Perkins. His books generally come in pretty close to the way that they're published. I mean, I think I tinkered with 3 or 4 sentences in Libra. What I want to say, though, I earned my stripes because that book had a very, very delicate legal read, because the original book had used real names of real figures in the murky background of the assassination. And these are people who have had sued in the past and were likely to sue in the present. And so we had to do some camouflage work to take it out of the zone of libel, and that was my contribution. Also, the counsel. I will say, by the way, just as is that some weird stuff happened as the book was coming into print. The people, 2 or 3 of the people that we were worried about suing died before pub date. It's like, wow, what's going on here? And the other thing that was really interesting about that publication is that Don got a lot of letters, and he would send copies of them to me with a note saying, "Here come the nuts." And I wonder if the Ransom Center has those letters, because as psychological data on the American state of mind, they are very valuable.
Thanks, Jerry. So I know that you said at the beginning that this was probably going to be an advanced seminar for superfans, but in fact, we have some readers here who are asking the question of where to start. So we have Andy Doyle from Marietta, Georgia, and Celeste Kearney from Arlington, Virginia, and C.J. Feinberg all ask, which book would you recommend to read first to readers new to DeLillo?
Take it, Mark.
Yeah, Mark.
White Noise first, because it's got so much going on, and I think it's so funny. It will draw you in right away, and things seem familiar. And after that, I'm with Jerry. Libra is the one, because it's his most, I guess, streamlined in terms of plot. You watch the 2 timelines come together. It's really magnificent the way it all comes together. And who doesn't know about the Kennedy assassination and Oswald? I think that will appeal to everyone there. And it just really pulls you along. And after you finish those, then we agree on this. Underworld is a big gulp, but it's got so much in it. It's so rich. I don't know if you want to add something else in the earlier late ones. I'm a big fan of Zero K myself too, his very recent novel. But I think start with White Noise. That's where I would start.
Yeah, I have not. I would not add to that. For DeLillo completists, I assume there are some out there.
Sure.
Do read Americana, because it's a wonderful thing to see a great novelist in their first novel, where they're not so guarded. They're trying things out. it's a messy novel, but when it's wonderful, it's really wonderful. If you're really a completist,
I know what's coming
I know
now.
it's coming too.
get a copy of Amazons from
Oh,
A.B.
yeah.
Which is a novel about hockey that he wrote under a pseudonym in
1980s when it came out.
1981 or something
That
like
book
that.
is utterly hilarious. It's
Yeah.
a riot from start to finish. And, you know, he disowns that book, but it's worth reading because you'll laugh every chapter, I guarantee you. For
Oh,
true completists, Ratner's Star, which is the book that
Oh,
no
yeah.
one has read. I've read it.
Yeah.
I'm sure Gary's read it too, but, you know, it's
I read it a while, not too long ago, just to see what I was not getting, and I didn't get it, but
very
it was,
distant orbit around the
it
other.
was curiously refreshing.
Well, as long as we both did mention white noise as the place to start. Christine Ross from Reading, Pennsylvania, asks if DeLillo has commented on the film adaptation. And of course, that also, you know, has he said anything about it? And also, as long as we're on the subject, how do you react to the movie as an adaptation of the book?
Mark, you know something about this, right?
I've talked to him on the phone several times while writing the notes and so forth for the Library of America volumes. All he said was, I thought it should be shorter. That's what he said. I think it should be shorter. You know, I agree with that. I think it's a noble effort. I think it starts to fall apart about 2/3 of the way through there. And, you know, there's some casting decisions I would not agree with at all. For example, Don Cheadle, whom I love, I think he's wrong for that part. And how do you capture the voice? You know, it's so voice driven. I don't think that's possible in cinema, frankly. And the tone of it, how it veers so beautifully from comedy to some dread and this very dark stuff. I don't know how you manage that in film. I don't think it quite handles that right either. I don't want to. I admire Noah Baumbach and a lot of the people who are making that movie, so I don't want to say too much against it. And I'm really glad he tried. I don't think it quite makes it though.
You know, the problem of tone was really it was so intelligent, so well made, so well acted, not so greatly cast. I admired a lot of it, but I think it missed Don's tone. And this is interesting. You know, that tone is, you would say it's impossible to get down in another medium, but I've seen productions of his plays. I've seen Valparaiso and The Day Room, which were done by two sort of small theater companies in New York.
I've seen both of those also.
And I had read the plays, and those actors got laughs in places where on the page it wasn't there, and they're sort of miraculous. So it can be done. I don't think it's been done on film yet. The movie that should be made is Libra, but the problem, here's like some insider stuff, folks. It was on the way to being signed up, and then Oliver Stone,
his movie,
sort of shouldered it aside with JFK, and that was that for assassination movies. Oh well.
Yeah, we should mention. Thanks for mentioning.
Come on, HBO. Come on, HBO.
Yeah. Well, how about a series? Libra could be a series.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you mentioned Valparaiso. I saw a production of that too, and that play just sprang up. It just came alive when you saw it live.
So it can be done.
It can be done.
You need the right actors and the right director.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So, I mean, speaking of Libra and other books, there's an interesting question. Darren Malloy says first, I've used 2 quotes from DeLillo as epigraphs for 2 of my books on contemporary American history, one from Libra and one from Underworld. Can you talk a little bit about DeLillo as a kind of historian?
As what?
A kind of historian.
Oh, first off, by the way, speaking of using epigraph, we forgot to mention Josh Ferris as another one of the writers who is a DeLillo cognoscente. His first novel about a failing ad agency uses the first line from Americana. Then we came to the end of another dull and lurid year. Well, as a historian, you know, there was a certain amount of controversy swirling around Libra when it was published from conservatives, and because they felt that he was playing fast and loose with sacred American history, and George, Mark, you might remember this more precisely. George Will, as much as accused him of being treasonous.
He said he was
they had an exchange. What was that?
He said he was a bad citizen.
Yeah.
And then Don said, "Oh, I feel that's flattered. I'm flattered to be called a bad citizen by George Will."
Yeah. But
let me throw this term out there.
Yeah.
Counter history.
Right.
That's how he describes Underworld, as a counter history. And, you know, not only does it unfold in reverse, but it's precisely that quotation that you were offering earlier, Jerry. There's a world inside the world, and the counter history allows that world to emerge as an alternate history of our time that's been going on. We all recognize it, know it's there. DeLillo brings it up to the surface and lets us look at it and lets us feel how that feels. So as an historian, you know, and of course he did lots of research for Libra. He read half of the Warren Commission report, and he did a lot of research for Underworld too, because you'd have to do that to know all those things about, you know, what nuclear technicians did and all those little vignettes from the 50s and 60s that are interspersed in that one section. So he's diligent in that way, but I think he's interested more in kind of the, I guess we go back to this word again, the aura or the spirit of the history, the pulse, that counter history that we all feel, but doesn't make it into the books. It's that other thing. And that's what we need to be revealed, and that his novels reveal that.
Yeah. So while you were just speaking, that's what the Nobel Prize Committee phoned. And
and
no,
we
they said that you've made a pretty good case for DeLillo as a great novelist of the modern American experience, but of course the committee's purview is global.
Yeah.
And they were asking you why he should be read in Budapest, Lagos, Singapore, and Montevideo.
I believe he is.
Well.
Well, have they read the names? That's about Americans abroad being in everybody else's way and making things happen the way they want them. And some of these themes too, like for example, in The Silence, we all are slaves of technology. And if it's suddenly stopped, I don't care where you are, everybody who's got a cell phone in Africa would have the same problem as the people in the United States. So that seems pretty resonant to me. Yeah, he's identified as an American writer, and I think that's one of the reasons he has not received the Nobel, in fact, already.
So I think it's inarguable that the past century, and at least part of this one, was the American century. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is, or some other kind of thing, is up endlessly for debate. But America is the country that shaped the history of the world in the second half of the 20th century. It simply is a fact. I don't believe that any other American writer of what I would call the post-war generation, the post-war generation being Mailer, Styron, Bellow, etc., but the generation that came after has gone broader or deeper in thinking about and representing and revealing the nature of the American experience and the strangeness of being a contemporary American. I mean, we live in we don't really grasp until we read people like DeLillo how strange it is to be an American, and he has shown us this. So we can learn about ourselves from DeLillo, and they can the rest of the world, the people in Montevideo and London and Berlin and Tokyo, can go deeper into this country that has the nature of this country that has such a profound effect on the lives that they live. And I mean, I do think that Don's agent, Robin Strauss, who also, by the way, does wonderful job with him and his work, would have the numbers, but he's translated and read in dozens of languages around the world, and I'm sure there are DeLillo-esque novelists in Bulgaria.
I think that's a perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much. You've been listening to Mark Osteen and Gerald Howard discuss the genius and legacy of Don DeLillo. A 2-volume edition of his novels, edited by Mark Osteen, is published in Library of America, volumes 363 and 374 in the series. Please join us for forthcoming online events from Library of America. On Tuesday, February 6th, LOA Live welcomes James Basker, president of the Gilder Lehrman Institute of American History, and Pulitzer Prize-winning historian Annette Gordon-Reed for an eye-opening look at 4 Black writers from the crucial decades that gave birth to the United States. The program marks publication of Black Writers of the Founding Era, volume 366 in the LOA series, edited and introduced by Professor Basker, with a foreword by Professor Gordon-Reed. Library Journal calls it extraordinary and unrivaled, vital, and necessary. Details about this and other upcoming LOA Live events can be found on our website, loa.org, where you'll also find information about Library of America's Don DeLillo edition and Black Writers of the Founding Era, and links to purchase those and other editions of Great American Writing. You'll also find recordings of tonight's and previous LOA Live events. Thanks so much again to Mark and Jerry, and have a terrific evening, everyone.
Thanks so much. I love doing this.
Thanks, everyone. Great time.